A single war left behind 3 million unexploded bombs. The 10 most horrifying and brutal facts of the Vietnam War. The number one fact remains something no one dares to reveal publicly even today. The Vietnam War was one of the most terrifying and destructive wars of the 20th century. The nearly 20-year-long conflict engulfed the entire Indo-Chinese peninsula, claiming more than 3 million lives, including over 2 million Vietnamese civilians. Millions more were displaced by the flames of war, chemical weapons, and famine. This war saw the United States deploy more than 500,000 troops at its peak, and turned the battlefields of Vietnam into the most extensive chemical warfare testing ground in human history. In today's video, Top 10 Earth will take you through the 10 most shocking and disturbing facts about the Vietnam War. 10th place. The Gulf of Tonkin, a war torn open by lies. On the night of August 4, 1964, in the pitch-black waters of the Gulf of Tonkin, the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Maddox suddenly sent an urgent flash message to Washington, claiming it had come under coordinated torpedo boat attack by North Vietnamese forces. That heart-pounding night became the pivotal turning point that triggered the full-scale escalation of the Vietnam War. The Pentagon immediately released shocking figures. North Vietnam had allegedly launched 2 separate attacks within 48 hours, firing 22 torpedoes and more than 130 shells. President Lyndon Johnson went on national television, showing dramatic photos of the damaged ships, successfully igniting public outrage across America. Congress then passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution with an overwhelming 88-2 vote in the Senate, granting the president virtually unlimited authority to take all necessary measures. Just 12 hours later, 64 U.S. warplanes lifted off from aircraft carriers and carried out the first retaliatory strikes on North Vietnamese ports, dropping 324 bombs and 176 rockets. In the 3 years that followed, the US would drop a total of 6.43 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, more explosives than were used on all fronts combined during the entire Second World War. Villages incinerated by napalm appeared as more than 3,800 charred black patches on satellite imagery, meaning an average of 3.5 villages were wiped off the map every single day. A single war left behind 3 million unexploded bombs. The 10 most horrifying and brutal facts of the Vietnam War. The number one fact remains something no one dares to reveal publicly even today. The Vietnam War was one of the most terrifying and destructive wars of the 20th century. The nearly 20-year-long conflict engulfed the entire Indo-Chinese peninsula, claiming more than 3 million lives, including over 2 million Vietnamese civilians. Millions more were displaced by the flames of war, chemical weapons, and famine. This war saw the United States deploy more than 500,000 troops at its peak, and turned the battlefields of Vietnam into the most extensive chemical warfare testing ground in human history. In today's video, Top 10 Earth will take you through the 10 most shocking and disturbing facts about the Vietnam War. 9th place. The most terrifying hand grenade in history. During the Vietnam War, American forces threw more than 500,000 M26 fragmentation grenades into the jungles and villages. This seemingly simple, old-fashioned weapon created nightmares far beyond imagination. The moment a soldier pulled the pin, the sharp ping of the spoon flying off was often more terrifying than the explosion itself. For seconds later, the metal canister would release 30 grams of TNT, propelling 300 pre-notched steel fragments outward at 2,400 meters per second across a 15-meter lethal radius. Medical reports showed that the average casualty required the surgical removal of 42 metal shards, and more than 80% of victims died from uncontrollable bleeding before help could arrive. During the 1968 Battle of Khe Sanh, M61 grenades thrown into tunnels by U.S. Marines accounted for 67% of all Viet Cong casualties. Autopsies revealed that many bodies contained over 200 steel fragments. Some shards retained enough energy to shatter bones even after passing through 3 layers of sandbags. These weapons proved terrifyingly adaptable in the wet jungle environment. Although U.S. manuals strictly required grenades to be stored dry-stored, more than 35% of those thrown in combat failed to detonate. These duds became the jungle's deadliest traps. In 1970 alone, over 400 civilians were killed or maimed by them. Even crueler, North Vietnamese forces repurposed captured American grenades into ghost mines, booby-trapping jungle paths with tripwires as thin as a hair. The modified traps achieved a 92% fatality rate. In the November 1967 Battle of Dak Tu, the U.S. 173rd Airborne Brigade expended 2,200 grenades in just 3 days, effectively knocking 2 entire North Vietnamese battalions out of action. Even survivors faced lifelong consequences. 37% required amputations, and 60% suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. This simple weapon completely rewrote the rules of close-quarters combat. In firefights within a 10-meter radius, grenades caused 3.2 times more casualties than automatic rifles. Combat logs from the U.S. 25th Infantry Division show that during the 1968 Tet Offensive, the average soldier threw 4.6 grenades per day. In jungle fighting, 70% of all enemy kills were credited to these thrown explosives. Even more frightening was the psychological terror. Interrogation reports from North Vietnamese prisoners revealed that 82% feared U.S. grenade teams above all else. These three-man squads specialized in saturating complex terrain with grenades and routinely carried 20 ready-to-throw pineapples in their packs. The long-term nightmare became clear only after the war. According to Vietnamese government statistics, as of 2019, more than 800,000 unexploded grenades still lie scattered across fields and villages, killing or injuring roughly 150 people every year. 8th place, the nightmare punishment, the bamboo stake pit torture. During the Vietnam War, a torture method known internally as the bamboo stake pit, or gradual impalement cage, was secretly used in certain interrogation zones. Survivors called it the silent slaughter because of its combination of extreme physical agony and total psychological destruction. According to declassified U.S. military archives, between 1966 and 1971, at least 37 detention facilities systematically employed this punishment. One interrogation center in Pha Quoc Long Province, 80 kilometers north of Saigon, processed 1,270 prisoners over 5 years. 219 of them are confirmed to have died from the procedure. The method was based on precise calculations of human physiological limits. Victims were forced to kneel or squat inside a specially designed bamboo grid cage. Each sharpened bamboo stake was positioned with deliberate spacing, close enough to pierce muscle tissue but not vital organs, ensuring death was slow rather than immediate. A 1968 internal U.S. Army medical report stated that muscle necrosis typically began after 48 hours, and wound infection rates reached 93% after 72 hours. Torturers could adjust the height of the cage or the victim's position to slow the rate of sinking, deliberately prolonging agony to 120 hours or more when extended confessions were required. Psychological studies showed that the constant, unrelenting pain triggered profound mental collapse. Of 83 survivors examined by International Red Cross investigators in 1970, 71 suffered permanent PTSD and 29 lost the ability to speak entirely. Interrogators deliberately exploited this effect. Records from one Mekong Delta POW camp show that memory confusion and disorientation rose dramatically after the punishment, increasing successful interrogation rates by 28%. The method remained hidden for years because the bamboo devices could be dismantled and burned in minutes, and the puncture wounds closely resembled those caused by ordinary beatings. It was not until 1971, when a New York Times photographer captured images of a stake cage being assembled, that the outside world glimpsed its true nature. Analysis of declassified Pentagon photos revealed that each apparatus required 200 to 300 specially treated bamboo stakes coated with a mixture of humus and animal feces, dramatically increasing the risk of fatal infection. The long-term consequences extended far beyond the war itself. In 2004, the Vietnamese government reported that only 153 confirmed survivors of the bamboo stake pits were still alive nationwide, and 121 of them required lifelong medical care. Even more shocking, a 2001 study by the U.S. National Institutes of Health found that 34% of the survivors' children were born with congenital neurological abnormalities, possibly the result of epigenetic changes caused by the extreme stress endured by their parents. This punishment thus became not only a testament to wartime atrocity, but a biological ethical tragedy that continues to affect multiple generations. 7th place, the most excited army in history. In the sweltering, humid jungles of Vietnam, the pockets of U.S. soldiers' camouflage uniforms held something far more dangerous than bullets or lighters: little white tablets. Between 1966 and 1973, more than 225 million amphetamine-class stimulant pills were systematically distributed to frontline troops by the U.S. military. That's enough for every single American soldier who served in Vietnam to swallow 3 to 4 pills every day, or enough to dose the entire U.S. population non-stop for 2 straight weeks. At Cam Ranh Bay, military doctors processed entire crates of the tablets daily. The small white pills, packed in brown glass bottles, were given harmless-sounding names like energy maintainers. Pilots received double doses before 12-hour bombing missions. Patrol units heading into the Ho Chi Minh Trail had to sign for a 30-day supply. Paratroopers were issued special caffeine-mixed versions right before jumping. In 1969 alone, consumption topped 53 million tablets, roughly 100 pills swallowed by American troops every single minute of the year. A 1968 internal Pentagon memo shows that warnings from military doctors about addiction risks were deliberately ignored. Soldiers quickly discovered that triple doses let them fight for 72 hours without sleep. The price? Auditory hallucinations, mowing down civilians in panic, or mistaking their own comrades for Viet Cong. Medical records from the 101st Airborne Division describe one platoon that, under 72-hour drug-induced frenzy, destroyed for suspected villages, 3 of which later proved to contain no enemy activity at all. When these supercharged warriors were finally pulled off the line, field hospitals had to set up dedicated sedation wards and inject barbiturates to counteract acute drug-induced psychosis. The real catastrophe exploded after the war ended. In 1971, the Veterans Administration reported that 28% of returning soldiers suffered severe drug dependency, 17 times higher than pre-war estimates. Los Angeles rehab centers treated Marines who held nurses at gunpoint demanding more pills. Retired paratroopers curled up in the New York subway, still hallucinating and searching for Charlie in the shadows. Even more chilling, declassified Pentagon files from 2003 admit that at least 15% of all air combat accidents were directly linked to pilot overdose, casualties quietly written off as necessary war losses. When the last helicopter lifted off from Saigon in 1975, Pentagon warehouses still held 23 unopened tons of these stimulants packed in military crates. Those chemical weapons, together with 58,000 young bodies, 300,000 addicts, and countless shattered families, became the strangest funeral offering in the entire history of the Vietnam War. 6th place, the tunnel rats, descent into a 250-kilometer underworld. When combat engineers blasted open a perfectly camouflaged entrance, what awaited them was not the light of victory, but a bottomless darkness. This was the subterranean kingdom the Viet Cong had painstakingly built over 20 years, an underground Vietnam that gave the Pentagon endless nightmares. Declassified U.S. military archives reveal that the Cu Kai tunnel complex alone stretched more than 250 kilometers, linking field hospitals, weapons factories, command centers, and even makeshift cinemas. The deepest command rooms lay 12 meters below the surface. Dug with nothing more than hose and baskets, the narrowest passages were only 38 centimeters wide. The U.S. Army was forced to recruit soldiers shorter than 1.65 m and lighter than 60 kilograms to form special units known as tunnel rats. Armed only with a pistol, a flashlight, and a knife, these men crawled into a lethal maze that neither poison gas nor bombs could destroy. Army Engineers 1966 statistics show that the average tunnel mission lasted 7 hours and 42 minutes in air containing less than 18% oxygen. The Vietnamese had built multi-layered defenses, swinging punji stake trapdoors, cages of live scorpions, and welcome rooms rigged with cascading horrors. The moment an intruder stepped inside, an iron spike board crashed from the ceiling, poison bamboo arrows shot from hidden wall slits, and the floor collapsed into a pit of sharpened stakes smeared with feces. Medical records from the 25th Infantry Division show an 82% fatality rate for soldiers who triggered such traps. Bodies often took weeks to recover. Even more chilling were the psychological traps. Deep inside, soldiers would suddenly hear a child crying or a woman sobbing. Following the sound almost always led to a booby-trapped mannequin wired with grenades. Medical reports revealed that soldiers who went on 3 or more tunnel missions suffered a 91% PTSD rate after the war, 2.3 times higher than regular infantry. When reconnaissance units finally mapped the complete 3D layout of the Cu Kai network in 1970, they were horrified to discover more than 2,000 hidden exits. Some ventilation shafts opened directly into the kitchens and latrines of U.S. bases. In 1969 alone, over 500 attacks on American camps originated from these tunnels. Most ironic of all, every time U.S. troops pumped cement into a tunnel section, the Viet Cong reopened new branches within 48 hours. Among the surviving tunnel rats who survived the war, 37% developed lifelong claustrophobia and 23% suffered permanent night blindness. A declassified 2004 Pentagon assessment admitted that of the 4,500 tunnel clearing operations conducted, fewer than 15% produced any lasting tactical value. Today, tourists wearing wearing hard hats stroll through the brightly lit show tunnels of the Siukai tourist site, the very same corridors that once caused thousands of American soldiers sleepless nights. History played a cruel joke. The inches of tunnel that once cost lives to gain can now be walked for the price of a $5 ticket. 5th place, the most devastating weapon, napalm. At dawn on March 6, 1965, the sky over Binh Duong province in South Vietnam was torn apart by hundreds of B-52 Stratofortress. When the first napalm canisters slammed into the rice paddies of the Mekong Delta, a weapon of unimaginable horror revealed its true face. The thick, sticky burning substance reached temperatures of 2,000 degrees Celsius and clung to palm-thatched roofs, turning entire villages into instant infernos. The air filled with the sickening smell of roasted flesh mixed with chemical stench, the most nauseating memory in the history of warfare. The United States dropped a total of 388,000 tons of napalm on Vietnam, equivalent to more than 200 kilograms of incendiary gel per square kilometer of the country. This improved formula, developed by Dow Chemical, mixed polystyrene with gasoline to create a jelly that would burn for more than 4 minutes. Declassified Pentagon documents show that between 1965 and 1973, U.S. forces conducted more than 4,700 napalm air strikes. During Operation Rolling Thunder alone, 18,000 tons of napalm were poured onto North Vietnam alone. Medical reports from survivors paint an even crueler picture. At Saigon Army Hospital, 85% of napalm burn patients had more than 50% of their body surface burned. Wound infection rates reached 93%. Because the sticky agent could not be washed off, medics were forced to scrub away charred tissue with wire brushes, a barbaric procedure that caused 75% of victims to die within 48 hours. Even worse, the cyanide gases released by burning napalm caused acute poisoning in 30% of fatalities, who died in double agony from fire and toxic fumes. The ecological catastrophe continues to this day. In 2020, the Vietnam Academy of Agricultural Sciences found that soil in heavily bombed Quang Tri province still contains benzo(a)pyrene levels 180 times above safe limits. In Thua Tien Hue province, 62% of water samples tested positive for highly toxic dioxin residues. U.S. Veterans Affairs statistics show that ground crew who handled napalm have a lymphoma rate 3.7 times higher than average soldiers, and their children have a congenital deformity rate 4.3 times the national average. The moral storm triggered by napalm eventually swept the world. Yet in bitter irony, Dow Chemical earned $120 million in military contracts during the war, and its stock price soared 370% at the height of the bombing. When the Geneva Disarmament Conference finally adopted the 1980 protocol banning incendiary weapons, 138,000 tons of unexploded napalm canisters were still rusting away in Vietnamese jungles, quietly leaking poison for decades to come. 4th place, the darkest moment, the My Lai massacre. At dawn on March 16, 1968, the cooking smoke rising over Sun Mai village, known to the U.S. Army as Pinkville, in Quang Ngai province was shattered by the roar of helicopters. Soldiers from Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, 11th Brigade, 23rd Infantry Division stormed into the hamlet, which had been labeled a stronghold of the Viet Cong 48th Battalion. What happened next became one of the blackest coordinates in modern military history. According to the 2009 Vietnamese government white paper on the My Lai massacre, 504 villagers were confirmed killed that morning, almost all women, children, and elderly men. When the smoke cleared, the official U.S. Army after-action report claimed 128 Viet Cong killed and exactly 3 weapons captured. The testimony later given in military courts was beyond horrific. In a 1998 publicly released confession tape, Private First Class Paul Medlow recalled Lieutenant William Kyo's order. He said, "Take care of them." Then he told us, "I want them dead." We just rounded them up and shot them. After the killing, soldiers burned 247 homes with flamethrowers, poured cyanide into the village wells, and slaughtered 732 head of livestock. Declassified 2003 Pentagon aerial photographs later proved that 9 neighboring hamlets were also hit that day. The true death toll likely exceeded 900. Just 3 hours after the massacre, the brigade commander, Colonel Aran Henderson, sent an encrypted messages ordering all units to use the pre-approved cover story. The soldiers of Charlie Company were not only shielded, they received collective commendations and 2 cases of beer each as a reward. U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command files show that between 1968 and 1969 the military intercepted at least 23 soldiers who tried to report the crime and destroyed 142 rolls of on-site film. The truth remained buried under a 34-month secrecy order until November 1969, when veteran Ronald Ridenour sent 30 letters to Congress and the White House, and the story finally broke in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. The 1970 court-martial exposed an even uglier reality. The presiding judge noted in his closing remarks that soldiers had been subjected to special briefings teaching that every living thing in the area was a potential threat. This psychological conditioning led 82% of the perpetrators to sincerely believe they were simply carrying out lawful military orders. In the end, only Lieutenant William Kyrie was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, a sentence President Nixon commuted to house arrest in 1974. Of the 25 other men indicted, 14 had charges dropped for lack of evidence, and the remaining 11 were acquitted by military courts. The massacre tore an unhealable wound in Vietnam War history. A 1998 Clinton-era investigative report admitted that between 1965 and 1973, U.S. forces committed at least 137 similar incidents, 89 of which have photographic evidence. In bitter irony, 23 members of Charlie Company later took their own lives due to PTSD, 7 more than the number who died in combat. Today, at the My Lai Memorial Site, 504 clay urns stand in a silent line along the path where the killings took place. Inside each urn is a bullet extracted from the skull of a victim. Third place, Agent Orange, the botanical hell. This defoliant, developed for the U.S. military by Monsanto and other chemical giants, earned its name from the orange stripes painted on its storage drums. Between 1961 and 1971, under the code name Operation Ranch Hand, 76 million liters of the poison were dumped over southern Vietnam, enough to fill 30 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Even the U.S. Army engineers who sprayed it wore full gas masks. That alone tells the story. Agent Orange contained 170 milligrams per kilogram of TCDD, the most toxic dioxin known to man. In the soil around Ho Chi Minh City today, dioxin levels are still 366 times above safe limits. An area of 26,000 square kilometers in the Mekong Delta, 3/4 the size of Hainan Island, was systematically contaminated. Vietnamese government figures, more than 4.8 million civilians were directly exposed. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs admits at least 300,000 American troops were affected as well. According to the Vietnam Red Cross, in Agent Orange contaminated zones, the rate of neural tube defects in newborns is 15 times higher than in uncontaminated areas. A 2019 study in the International Journal of Epidemiology found that Vietnamese exposed to Agent Orange have a 23.8 times higher risk of liver cancer and a 72% higher risk of soft tissue sarcoma. At Ho Chi Minh City Oncology Hospital, 17% of all inpatients are now being treated for Agent Orange-related cancers. The youngest is only 14 years old. American soldiers were not spared. Autopsy of Oregon National Guardsman Paul Reutershan in 2005 showed liver dioxin levels 317 times above normal. By 1984, when Monsanto and other manufacturers paid $180 million to settle U.S. veterans' claims, 9,200 Vietnam veterans had already died from Agent Orange-induced cancers. Vietnamese victims have never received a cent in compensation. In communities near the former Da Nang Air Base, blood dioxin levels remain 20 times higher than the U.S. EPA safety standard. A 2018 UN Development Program report estimates that complete cleanup of Vietnam's contaminated zones will cost $450 million. Less than 1/10 of that amount has been raised so far. When scientists began finding inherited dioxin exposure markers in the umbilical cord blood of Vietnamese children born decades after the spraying ended, it became clear the poison will shadow at least 3 generations. Those silver C-123s that once circled above the jungle ultimately carved deeper scars into the human genome than any bomb crater ever could. Second place, the most terrifying prison, the tiger cages. In 1965, on the outskirts of Nha Trang in southern Vietnam, a secret prison reeked of rotting flesh and human waste. 400 political prisoners were crammed into 200 iron cages measuring just 1.6 m times 1.6 m. These modern torture devices, known as tiger cages, were woven from steel bars so tightly that prisoners could neither lie down nor stand straight, they could only curl into a fetal position. Day after day, their spines slowly deformed. These These are the exact scenes captured in 1967 photographs taken by U.S. Army intelligence officer James August Muller. Originally built in 1957 by the French colonial regime, the cages were expanded and perfected as South Vietnam intensified its crackdown on the Viet Cong. The bars were spaced precisely 3.8 centimeters apart, wide enough for guards to clearly observe every grimace of agony, yet narrow enough to prevent prisoners from ending their own lives. A 1970 U.S. Senate Investigation Committee report revealed that across the entire country there were 46 such facilities holding over 30,000 political prisoners, 80% of whom had never been charged or tried. The most notorious was Con Dao, Pulo Condor, Prison Island, where daily water rations were limited to 150 milliliters. More than 80% of inmates died within 3 months from dehydration or infection. International silence was finally shattered in September 1970 when Life magazine published 18 smuggled photographs taken by war correspondent William Saxby. The global outrage forced the South Vietnamese government to improve conditions within 3 months. They widened the bar spacing to 7.6 centimeters and issued some prisoners straw sandals, a cynical cosmetic change that only confirmed the atrocities. Secret U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee data show that in 1971 alone, $1.2 million worth of medical supplies intended for civilians were diverted to these prisons, yet the monthly death rate still hovered at 14%. When North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon in 1975, they discovered the final batch of tiger cages at Tan Heap Prison, better known as Kai Hoa. Measurements showed that the improved versions now had floors made of spiked metal grating. Prisoners had to constantly shift their weight to avoid having their soles impaled. A cold, calculated application of ergonomics turned into systematic torture. Today, the rusted remnants of tiger cages preserved at the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City still bear 263 sets of tally marks scratched into the bars with fingernails, the prisoners' last humble record of the days they endured before freedom or death. First place, the nightmare inflicted on female prisoners, forced lactation experiments. Between 1965 and 1973, more than 3,000 Vietnamese women were taken prisoner. Approximately 15% of them, at least 450 women, were subjected to secret medical experiments using a chemical cocktail later known as the forced lactation agent. The compound consisted of high-dose estradiol valerate, isoproterenol, and other hormones. Its purpose was to artificially trigger massive estrogen release and induce lactation in women who had never been pregnant or given birth. In 1971 congressional testimony, U.S. Army physician Dr. John Ritter admitted that each injection contained 3 times the normal therapeutic dose. Within 48 hours of injection, victims suffered violent headaches, vomiting, and severe breast swelling. Even nulliparous women began producing milk uncontrollably. War correspondent David Halberstam's on-site notes recorded that the average victim lost 800 milliliters of breast milk per day, 3 times the normal lactation volume. Captured South Vietnamese interrogation manuals from 1968 reveal that the drug was deliberately administered during specific phases of the menstrual cycle to boost effectiveness by 30 to 40%. Retired POW camp administrator James Clayton disclosed in his memoir that at the peak of 1972, one single detention center consumed 2,000 ampoules of the agent per month. The long-term damage was devastating. A post-war follow-up study by Hanoi Medical University found that 67% of survivors suffered premature ovarian failure, with menopause occurring between ages 32 and 35. The covert nature of the program kept it hidden for decades. Only in 1993 did The Lancet indirectly confirm the after-effects when bone density scans showed that victims experienced bone mass loss 1.8 times faster than the general population. In 2001, declassified files presented at the Geneva Disarmament Conference classified the agent as a non-lethal chemical weapon, yet noted that the psychological trauma index was 2.3 times higher than conventional torture methods. At the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City, medical file VN 1975-047 records the case of a woman, pseudonym Quen Thai Mai, who received injections for 91 consecutive days. Her prolactin level reached 40 times the upper normal maximum, eventually causing compressive optic nerve damage and permanent blindness. A total of 217 similar medical dossiers survive, forming the most systematic case series of biochemical sexual torture in recorded military history. This is the #1 fact that, even half a century later, almost no official source dares to openly acknowledge. And that brings us to the end of today's video. Of these 10 most horrifying and brutal facts about the Vietnam War, which one shocked or disturbed you the most? Please let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. If you found this video powerful, please Please give it a like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next one. Sharing it with your friends is the biggest support you can give us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Take care.